the pulse of change, the revolution of Islam. Imagine a world of shifting horizons. The year is 610 Common Era. The Arabian Peninsula is a land of harsh beauty and brutal tribalism. Here, life is governed by the sword, the lineage, and the idols housed within the city of Makkah. It was a society defined by stark contrasts, great wealth for the few and utter voicelessness for the many. In this age of ignorance, or Jahiliyyah, the concept of human equality was a fantasy. Women were property, the poor were invisible, and the orphan was a burden. But in the quiet darkness of a cave called Hira, on the outskirts of Makkah, the silence of the desert was about to be shattered. A man named Muhammad, peace be upon him, known by his community as Al-Amin, the trustworthy, received a command that would pivot the entire course of human history. Iqra, the voice commanded. Read, or proclaim. This was not just the birth of a religion, it was the spark of a social, intellectual, and spiritual revolution. The message Muhammad, peace be upon him, brought back from the mountain was a direct challenge to the status quo. To the tribal leaders of the Quraysh, it was a declaration of war against their way of life. Why? Because Islam didn't just ask people to pray, it asked them to change how they treated one another. The revolution of Islam began with a radical idea, the equality of the soul. In a world where your worth was determined by your tribe, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, proclaimed that an Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab over an Arab. He brought a message that claimed the slave and the master stood shoulder to shoulder in prayer. Think about the shockwaves this caused. For the first time, women were granted rights to inheritance and the power to refuse a marriage. The practice of female infanticide was abolished. The revolution was the sudden, jarring shift from a culture of might makes right to a culture of right makes might. The early followers, the marginalized, the young, and the oppressed saw in Islam a light of dignity. But for the elite, this light was a fire that threatened to burn their hierarchy to the ground. 13 years of persecution in Makkah led to a pivotal moment, the Hijrah, the migration to Medina in 622 CE. This wasn't just a flight from danger, it was the founding of a new kind of society. In Medina, the revolution took a physical form. Muhammad, peace be upon him, drafted the Covenant of Medina, arguably one of the world's first written constitutions. It established a multi-faith community where Jews, Christians, and Muslims were granted religious freedom and a collective responsibility for defense. Islam revolutionized the concept of the tribe. It replaced blood loyalty with a faith loyalty, the Ummah. But the revolution wasn't just social, it was economic. The introduction of zakat, obligatory charity, meant that wealth was no longer allowed to stagnate in the pockets of the rich. It had to flow to the poor. It was the world's first systematic social safety net. As the community grew, so did its resilience. Through battles and treaties, the message spread not just through the sword, as some histories oversimplify, but through the magnetic pull of a system that actually worked for the common man. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away, the revolution did not die with him. It expanded with a speed that still baffles historians today. Within a century, the Islamic world stretched from the borders of China to the Atlantic coast of Spain. But the most profound revolution wasn't the borders drawn on a map, it was the borders crossed in the human mind. The Quranic command to reflect, observe, and seek knowledge sparked what we now call the Islamic Golden Age. While Europe was in its dark ages, the cities of Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo were glowing with the light of libraries. The revolution of Islam made knowledge a religious duty. In the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, scholars translated the works of the Greeks, Persians, and Indian. Muslim mathematicians gave the world the decimal system and the foundations of algebra. Physicians like Ibn Sina wrote the Canon of Medicine, which would be the standard medical textbook in Europe for 500 years. This was the intellectual revolution of Islam, the idea that faith and reason were not enemies, but two wings of the same bird. Science was seen as a way to marvel at the Creator's handiwork. So, what is the revolution of Islam when we look at it today? It is the story of a merchant in a cave who changed the definition of power. It is the story of how a fragmented, warring people became the custodians of the world's knowledge. The revolution wasn't just a 7th century event, it is a recurring pulse. It's found in the calligraphy that decorates the Alhambra, in the fivefold call to prayer that echoes across every continent, and in the billion-plus people who find a sense of belonging in a global brotherhood. It taught the world that the most powerful revolution isn't one of territory, but one of the heart, a shift from the worship of the created to the worship of the Creator, and a commitment to justice that transcends race, class, and time. The desert winds still blow, the horizons still shift, but the message of that revolution remains as a bridge between the ancient world and our modern search for meaning. Music swells to a crescendo and then fades into a single, resonant note. Outro: justice, knowledge, equality. The revolution continues,